Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank you for being as faithful and loyal and interested as you are with our daily masses and also this Friday Q&A. I will be making some major announcements soon about matters related to daily mass and to the Q&A and also to B&B, so stay tuned. I'm not quite ready to make those announcements, but I will keep you apprised. Now, a couple things. Number one, people ask about the Parish Press, at least some do. And I'm sure by now all of you have gone to the website. You're familiar with the Parish Press. You know the history. Hi, Myrna. You know the history. You also know what our goals are and our purposes are. And you've probably, if you've ever been in a church, a narthex or a sacristy or a vesting area or whatever, you've probably seen our products all over the place. And that's because we've been providing devotional guides and charts and prayers for clergy and lay people, for almost 100 years. We're not that far away from celebrating our 100th anniversary as a publishing company. And when my wife and I bought it, we simply wanted to be able to make sure that we could continue to offer things to you and to your churches. But we had already begun the process ourselves with a subsidiary part of what would become the Parish Press, and that is something called Dove Tracts. So my wife and I had already published a book called To God Be the Glory, and every now and then I read a section to you. And by then we had also done teaching DVDs where I explained the Book of Common Prayer, where I teach people how to do the daily office, where I explain everything that goes place in the Mass. A DVD for children, a DVD for adults, and what we call an instructed Eucharist. So that's what we were doing. And in addition, numerous tracts. Like you go to churches, you look in the tract rack, you may very well see our tracts in there because we wanted to make brief statements and teachings available to everybody. So publishing big books, not been so much our task. In fact, we have only published a few bigger books, and we've learned some lessons from that, let's say. So one of the things that is very important is to focus, and as some people say, make the main thing the main thing. And what we have attempted to do with the Parish Press is absolutely never produce things that are in conflict with other companies that are already publishing the same thing. So what you discover the Parish Press is what you might call quite unique. Well, one of the things that we've been committed to doing is to make sure that people don't forget their history, forget their tradition. But that also means we have people who are coming into the history and tradition of the faith, and that means they want to know more. And they don't want to read a 500-page book about it. One of the things that I remember as a boy was belonging to something called the OSV, or the Order of St. Vincent. It was wonderful. From the time I was a boy, it had in there charts, graphs, pictures, explaining what you carry up to the altar. For example, oftentimes when I go to churches for Mass on a Sunday, I just wonder what in the world ever happened to training. I'll have one person bring up wine and water in the instead of two, when there are servers all over the place, and I will see people having the handles and handing the cruet to me, and I can't get the cruet. I mean, because they have the handle in the beginning of the Mass at the offertory, at least. We have very specific instructions about what the servers do. When do they move the book? Do you just go up and start lighting candles like you do a birthday cake, or is there a specific way we do it and reasons for doing it that way? Why, as you heard from me last week, do we not cock the missal on the right side of the altar towards the center, but rather square it off with the right side? Why do we cock it to the side when it gets over to the other side, etc., etc.? All those things that I talk with you about. Well, guess what? What came into our hands It's a very interesting book. And the reason it's interesting is this priest had written the Parish Press and said, may I have permission to print some of your prints, your charts, into my book that I'm writing? Well, he didn't stop at one. He's written 3 books now. But guess what? Not published. 3 incredible books. Now, you remember when I talked about the OSV, Order of St. Vincent, which was a guild for altar servers or acolytes or whatever you want to call them? Well, guess what? Sometimes we find today that there are people who don't have as much of an attention span as they used to. So if you hand somebody a 25-page booklet of telling them exactly how to serve, many of them won't read it. Many of them can't handle more than a few words on a page. And we now have more and more people who are being tested for attention deficit disorder, ADD, and ADHD that has the hyperactive component to it. So what we know is that people don't sit down and listen. Even what I'm doing this morning, this is reaching a particular age group. There's a particular age group that will never bother to watch this because I'm going to speak for more than 5 minutes, and they can't handle more than 5 minutes worth of information. It's just, sadly, the world that we find ourselves in today. So, a really wonderful priest who belongs also to the same society that I'm a member of, what we call SSC, or Society of the Holy Cross, Father Paul Stern, is a chaplain. And in South Carolina, there's what's called the C.S. Lewis Student Center and St. Theodore's Anglican Chapel, where? At the University of South Carolina. And he also assists at the cathedral, which is the Cathedral of the Epiphany in Columbia, South Carolina, where a friend of mine is bishop, and I know most of the priests there one way or another. And what he discovered was the same thing that we discovered, but in a different way. And in the Parish Press, we recognized that we needed to make more and more of these charts and things available. For example, if you watch a priest come running in and just throw his vestments on 5 minutes before Mass, or if you watch servers rushing in 15 minutes before Mass begins, the question is, when did they have time to say their prayers? As you know, as you've heard me say, every single thing that I wear has a prayer. I have a chart right there in my little sacristy in this chapel of Our Lady of Walsingham Chapel here in our residence, which is called Dovehaven 2. I think you know bishops' houses are all supposed to have names. Ours is in Peoria was Dovehaven, so this is Dovehaven 2. So here at Dovehaven 2, the chapel of Our Lady of Walsingham with 1830 stained glass windows that a friend of mine was able to get in a closed church in Germany. What we have is not only the prayers that I say when I get prepared, but up at the altar I have cards that have all the prayers that I say when I'm offering up the bread, when I'm offering up the wine. And most of you don't even have to be worried about that. I mean, it's what the clergy use, because even though we've memorized things, I've seen priests forget the Lord's Prayer at the altar when they're busy because they're praying and suddenly they realize that they've missed a word or two in the Lord's Prayer. That's great. They're meditating. Not a problem. But what about servers? What do they do? Well, the little manuals aren't as helpful anymore, and especially with prayer book revision, which means by the 1970s, new liturgies were being put in and questions were being asked about which prayers do we use and when do we ring the bells and how do we light the candles. And as I say, some people just walk in and start lighting the candles at the altar as if it's a birthday cake without realizing that there is a specific way to light candles. Altar guilds, how in the world do we set up the paten and the chalice and the purificator, and what's the names of all those things? I mean, you've heard me say that one of the things that I can't understand today is how some people are now saying sanctuary when they're not referring to what takes place behind the altar rail, but the whole worship space. And that's just not true. It's just not the way it is. So this book teaches all of these realities without being preachy or without it just being point 1, point 2, point 3. So, answer your first question. Are we currently writing books? Answer, yes. I am completing a book right now on the Apocrypha for children. We have just completed recently an Old Testament book for children, and some of you are patrons because you actually sent some donations so that we could get it published. Thank you very much. And the third book that my wife is working on are a collection of my addresses over a period of 15 years, which will give you the complete history of what was going on in parts of Midwest from the 1840s on. So I hope that when that book comes out, that it'll be of some interest and value to some of you, especially if you've lived in Illinois and Wisconsin and parts of Missouri. So those are the 3 books we're working on right now that will soon be published. But here's another one. Father Paul Stern. And if you're watching today, Father Paul, this was great fun to discover your book. And I recently was reading this book in a hospital room to a priest who was dying and to his family. And his family were chuckling all the way through it. And so it's going to be backwards because I want to see who's coming on. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Paul. Hi, Teresa. It says, solemnly serving our Savior at St. Swithin's, commonly called the littlest acolyte. Well, acolyte can be a generic term for altar servers or altar boys or any number of things, a host of things. In the technical sense, the word acolyte is used to describe what we call one of the minor orders of the church, which I will not bore you with today. You know what the major orders are: deacon, priest, and bishop. But did you know there were 7 minor orders that the church has celebrated or at various points in time have celebrated? So what we're going to be able to do today is I'm going to read to you a section from Father Paul Stern's book, Solemnly Serving Our Savior at St. Swithin's, commonly called the Littlest Acolyte, and it's book 1. And I'm going to just be able to read a few pages, and let's have fun with it. Sit back, enjoy yourself, turn off all of your other devices, pay no attention to the numerous stimuli that are trying to lead you away from listening, because that's what this world is doing now. Some people can't really even do something unless they have little white Arab things in their ears anymore. So let's go. I had to bring my little brother, apologized Patrick Walsingham to Father Simeon Candlemas as he strode into the vestry of St. Swithin's Church with the boy in tow. Our mother wanted all of us to get out of the house while she was making cookies. Well, I would have had to remove myself from temptation too, replied Father Candlemas. But I don't mind you bringing Timmy along to acolyte practice. Maybe we can figure out a job for him as well, he added, and he placed his hand upon the boy's head. He's too young, protested Patrick. He'll only get in the way, but I'll make sure he doesn't cause any trouble. And if he gets too fidgety, Susanna's going to take him out. Timmy himself never thought he was that much trouble, and he couldn't understand why his big brother was so concerned. He had seen Patrick serve at Mass almost every Sunday for as long as he could remember. And he had recently started to wonder when he would be old enough to help at the altar. The big brass processional cross looked far too heavy for him to lift, but Father Candlemas didn't seem to be as dead set against his serving as was his own brother. If he's half as conscientious as you are, we shouldn't have any problem whatsoever, said Father Candlemas to Patrick. Well, Timmy didn't know what conscientious meant. But since it was such a big word, he figured it must mean big. And even though Patrick was 12 years older than Timmy, Timmy was probably at least half as tall as Patrick, as Timmy thought Father Candlemas meant. So maybe he would be big enough to serve after all. Father Candlemas continued. We've got 3 acolytes to train today. Deacon Tasiyaikoa's son Lawrence, who's going to be the crucifer for the first time tomorrow. And then the Thomas twins, who have never served at the altar and are learning all about the ancient liturgy, which is still new to them. Didn't they used to go to that big rock and roll church with the light show and the smoke machine, asked Patrick? Yes. That's where they first learned about the love of Jesus. The same Jesus whom you learned to love here at St. Swithin's. But if they ever missed the light show, we've got one of our own, Father Candlemas joked, taking one of the candle lighters off its hook. Not to mention a smoke machine, added Steward Charles, strolling into the sacristy, holding a newly polished thurible aloft. Stewart had just been cleaning the censer and getting it into tip-top shape, always wanting the church's possessions to be as sparkling and sanitary as possible. With his horn-rimmed glasses, argyle socks, and neatly parted and pomaded hair, he looked like a relic from a bygone age. Nobody else could have gotten sway with wearing those socks while fully vested, but with Stewart, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. At least he color coordinated them with the liturgical season. I just appointed Stewart acolyte master, so he's going to assist with the rehearsal today, Father Candlemas explained. If only for a short while, it will be good preparation before he departs for seminary. Just then, the Thomas twins walked into the sacristy, Red, short for Reddington, and Jake, short for Jacob. Providential timing, exclaimed Father Candlemas as he handed Red the candle lighter he was holding. Let's train you how to light the candles. Patrick handed Jake the other one as he showed him how to slide the wick up to light it. Uh-oh, said Father Candlemas when he saw the tiny stub of a wick, which was all that was left. We've got a wicked problem here. We'll have to put a new one in first. Steward, hand me a fresh wick from that cabinet. Thank you. Here's what you do. First, take the old bit out, throw it away, and then scrape off about an inch of the wax from one end of the new wick into the rubbish bin, not into the sink, or it will clog up. Never put wax into the sink. That's a very wicked thing to do. So then you take the de-waxed end and thread it through the hole and bend it back up so that you can slide the wick up and down. See? And later when you're lighting the candles, here's a little trick to make it easier. Bend a few inches of the exposed end of the wick back in the direction that the lighter bends away from the extinguisher cup so that it will point down into the candle. Wicked can mean we are fallen or bent away from God. So, you can think of that as a wicked wick. Got it? Arise. Let's go. Hence. Stewart handed Patrick the thurible and picked up the incense boat, and the whole crew moved out into the church to practice. When you light the candles, explained Father Candlemas once they'd arrived at the altar, make a horizontal arc with the end of the wick around the side of the altar to reach the back so that you don't drip wax on the fair linen. You start with the candles closest to the cross and then go outwards toward the edge of the altar. It's not a race, so don't try to beat each other to the finish. Try to move at the same time pace and balance each other. Well, what if there's only one of us to light them, asked Red. Well, that's an excellent question, remarked Father Candlemas. In that case, you start with the epistle side, the right side of the altar, where the missal, the priest's big prayer book, is during the epistle, and light all the ones on that side. And then you move over to the left side, which is the gospel side, reverencing the cross along the way, and then do the ones on that side, always starting closest to the cross. Now, do you see what you've learned so far there, folks? Well, let me show you something. Just so you understand how important this is. See this? That's what he's talking about. See this? See, I've left a little nub there for you. Can you see this is through the little hole there? It's bent. It's now there. I've left a little one so I can demonstrate. That goes down in there, comes up when we're ready to light. And what does it have here? For extinguishing. In other words, don't flick your Bic. There's nothing that looks worse than going into a church and see somebody walk out with matches or with a little Bic or something like that. In the church, we have things that look better at the altar, and they're done neatly, and there's a way of lighting the candles, and that's what was just described. So it's going to go through the rest of the book explaining all of these kinds of things, and even though it looks like it's written for the servers, there's adults reading this. And I'll tell you, I'll conclude with a few thoughts. Anytime I do what's called a children's sermon, and I'm not sure I know what that means, but for me at least, it meant bringing young children up to the altar and sitting in front of me and my preaching my sermon, what we call ex cathedra, moving a special chair over for me called a faldstool. Bishops have a movable chair called a faldstool. It's different from the bishop's throne. And my sitting there and teaching. And, you know, most of the time I had the children's attention. But I'll tell you whose attention I really had. And that's the adults who are sitting like this. Wow. You know why? Because a lot of adults are afraid to ask questions because they think that everybody figures they already know the answers. And the other part is that adults are waiting to hear what the children ask. And many adults walk away with more information than they came because they got an answer, but they got an answer on a level that really might penetrate. But today I'll leave you with this question. I'm not going to burden you with my previous life in psychology. I mean, that's a matter of record, but it doesn't necessarily always translate out. But what it means is in learning psychology, one of the disciplines that, of course, I had to study significantly, we have what we call paired associate learning. And that means if you take something here that is familiar and you want to introduce something else, if it's similar enough, it goes with the other thought. It becomes a paired associate, and it's easier to learn. I'll give you, a really basic explanation. When I was learning Italian, I was able to remember more Italian because I already spoke French. And when I started learning Spanish, it was easier because I had already known Latin, Italian, and French. But I have to tell you right now, there's no way in the world very well I'm going to learn German today because that's brand new concepts matched up with my limited memory of Swedish that was spoken when I was a boy, because there's some similarities. So what I'm trying to say, it's easier to learn something that's familiar and similar to something you already know. That's what this book is about. It's paired associate learning. Why is that? Because not only do we have this really neat story that I've just read to you, but if you look in here, we have illustrations of what was just taught. So instead of a server just being told, go light the candles and do it the right way, we have an explanation that's fun and a picture they can look at. So anyway, my dear wife, who is the general editor and the one who makes this Parish Press work, I don't. I have the easy job. I just write. And so she's working with Father Paul Stern. Father Paul, if you're watching this today, I'm proud of you. Good job. This is not a book that is going to make it into the hands of people who want to sit around and argue systematic theology. This is going to get into the hands of more people who are going to be fascinated with and interested in why do we do the things the way we do, and how do I train servers to do these things. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I'll be telling more about this book and subsequent books to you in the future. But do keep your eyes peeled, so to speak. And if you haven't lately, how about going to our website, the Parish Press, and see the things that are there, and then see if you recognize them in your church. And if you're in a church and you don't see these things, maybe you ought to ask the question, why not? They help. God bless.